The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luis Lacalle Pou, President of the Eastern Republic of Uruguay. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Luis Lacalle Pou, President of the Eastern Republic of Uruguay, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Señor Presidente de la
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen. Almost 2 years ago, the world completely changed. It affected all countries, nations across the globe. It affected the rich, the poor, the big ones, the small ones, the developed, and those that were not. And added to that, there was no plan. And every country dealt with the pandemic with different formula. And the results are known. There have been many different countries with variations and yet similar approaches. COVID showed and revealed both weaknesses and strengths. It's worthwhile to acknowledge the great work of the scientists and the researchers, the great work of the healthcare system that was overwhelmed, the great work of teachers and professors who devised ways to try and provide education in some way. Work changed in a unique way in the form in which it was done. In short, humanity showed its capacity to adapt and survive a crisis of such dimensions. And let me say that that's the best version that we're living. As a counterpart to all of that, too, it revealed the inequities, the differences, the inequities structurally in each country, the ethical issues, and vocations of liberty of different societies and governments. Our country, Uruguay, has an immense democratic vocation and very much values individual freedom. Freedom as the most pure state of the individual. And what has been shown in this pandemic is that what was lacking was because of unequal access to the tools, and that meant that freedom can be enjoyed in different ways. And what has landed with a thud is this false dichotomy between the presence of the state and individual freedom. And more, those countries where the state did a good job of protecting and protected the most vulnerable individuals and gave them access to the tools they needed to be able to exercise their freedom. And that's why it seems to me that we take a moment here and think about this. Of course, here what we're talking about is the internal policies in each of our countries, but there are international connotations or repercussions. We cannot conceive of freedom without conceiving of it with responsibility and solidarity. Each and every one of us in our environments. In Uruguay, in my country, the people showed that with the use of responsible freedom, we were able to manage an important or significant part of the pandemic without any major reversals. The solidarity of the community was present in many great acts, but we could also see it reflected in acts unknown to the larger public, but ones which had a positive impact. At the international level, where we countries participated in one way or another, and we trusted part of our development to that community, here we need to be clear, and especially with regard to vaccines, we need to be clear. There was a race against time to develop the vaccines. It was done in record time. And let's be careful here. I don't want to talk about patents or formulas here. That's not my intention. I want to talk about access. There was a deficit in the supply, a shortage of vaccine supply, and it was not equitable. Countries had to go out, each and every country had to go out and buy for itself. And why do I think it's important to emphasize this? Because the vaccination process is vital, we all know, to recover freedom in our countries. I'd like to mention 3 other elements that impact the freedom of peoples. During the pandemic, of course, governments needed to protect their people. That was the first thing we had to do, was protect our compatriots. But also we needed to be aware or alert to the fact that that protection should not then become protectionism. We needed freedom to trade, freedom to compete for excellency, and competition for access to markets. Our country is in that process now. And it's in the process of opening up more to the world. And we need there to be a correlation with all the countries and blocs and great powers. Also, ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't stand before this forum without speaking about the violation of human rights. Violation of human rights by governments that belong to this organization. And we're clear that they're respectful of the principle of non-intervention. We are respectful of that. But we also need to understand that we cannot remain silent about these violations. We must denounce them. The abuse of power can go to the detriment of freedom. There are countries where the governments fear their people and curtail freedom. And they end up impoverishing their people for generations, several generations. And finally, and this has been mentioned here by several heads of state, the freedom of the future, the health of the planet. We've heard statements, we've participated in conferences, we've undertaken commitments. Now it's time to move to action and practice. And here, I need to emphasize that we need mechanisms for financing so that countries can have access to and make progress with sustainable development and protection of the environment. I'd like to conclude with an optimistic vision of reality. As a young, I fought Thomas Hobbes, the concept that man is the wolf of man. Time has shown that he was deeply wrong, Hobbes. Those that have not read his book, I would also recommend the book by Hans Rosling, Factfulness, where he clearly shows positive evolution of humanity. And that's why after this assembly, each and every one of us will return to our countries to deal with our daily tasks in the domestic arena. But let us not lose sight of what we've said here and what we've heard here. Every action in every place in the world involves all of us. Because if there's some lesson to be drawn from this pandemic, it is that we are all one. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Eastern Republic of Uruguay for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.